It started with a lie so small it could have slipped past any man who wasn't paying attention. A throwaway sentence tossed across the dinner table like it meant nothing. "Kelsey's coming with us this weekend." She said it while stirring her wine with her finger, like the glass was too good for a spoon. I didn't respond right away because I was trying to make sense of it. The trip was supposed to be for our anniversary. Just the two of us. No distractions. No friends. Definitely no Kelsey. But she moved on, already talking about what to pack, what kind of snacks we'd need, and how cute and remote the cabin looked in the pictures. I let it slide, not because I was okay with it, but because I needed to watch a little longer. That's how you catch things. You wait. You let the other person feel safe. By Friday morning, we were on the road. It was a 4-hour drive, and the back seat was already stuffed with bags and chatter. Kelsey was loud, overfamiliar, the kind of presence that makes silence feel like a threat. She didn't act like a third wheel. She acted like she owned one of the front seats. The strange thing was they barely looked at me the whole drive. It wasn't just normal girls catching up energy. It was calculated, like I wasn't there to be part of the trip. I was a placeholder, a witness, something to be tolerated. We arrived at the cabin just before dusk. It stood on a slope, surrounded by black trees, sharp wind slicing through the gaps in the wooden boards. It looked like the kind of place secrets could live and never be found. While I unloaded the car, they rushed inside. They were whispering, giggling, then suddenly silent when I stepped through the door. The place had 2 bedrooms. I was expecting us to share one naturally, but when I opened the door to the master, I found both their bags already inside. I didn't say anything. I just set my own down in the smaller room and shut the door. That night, things got strange fast. I made dinner. They didn't eat much. They drank instead wine first, then shots of some awful pink liquor Kelsey had brought in her overnight bag. I watched the bottle drain between them as the light outside vanished and the fire crackled low in the hearth. They kept locking eyes, finishing each other's sentences like it was all scripted. When I finally asked what the plan was for tomorrow, Kelsey answered before my wife could. "We'll probably go hiking. Just the 2 of us. You should rest, you look tired." Not we. Not maybe. It was a decision, made without me. I went to bed early, left them in the living room with their laughter echoing against the wood. But I couldn't sleep. Not because of the cold, but because the laughter stopped too suddenly. All at once, like a switch had been flipped. Then footsteps, soft, careful, passing my door. I waited. 10 minutes. 15. I got up. The main room was empty. Their glasses were still on the table. One still had lipstick on the rim, but the fire was out. The cabin felt colder now, darker than it should have been. I walked back toward the master bedroom and heard a sound. A soft, whispered voice, too low to make out, followed by a short, sharp laugh that was swallowed almost immediately. I didn't go in. I stood outside the door, listening, not moving. My hands felt heavy, not fists, just weight. And then I heard it. My name. Not spoken to me, but said like a question. Like they were talking about me. And the tone wasn't kind. It was mocking, teasing. I left. Walked out into the dark, down to the edge of the trees. I didn't know what I was doing. Maybe just buying myself a few minutes to think. Or maybe I wanted them to notice I was gone. But when I came back in, the cabin was silent. The bedroom door shut. Lights off. That night, I slept in my clothes. I didn't brush my teeth. Didn't turn off the lamp. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, hearing every board creak under phantom footsteps. The next morning, everything would change. But I didn't know that yet. I just knew something was wrong. Deeply, poisonously wrong. And whatever it was, they weren't even trying to hide it anymore. Morning felt artificial. Like everything had been carefully reset to keep up the illusion. The smell of coffee wafted through the cabin, too strong, almost aggressive. As if someone had dumped an entire bag of beans into the machine just to make sure I noticed. I came into the kitchen and found them both sitting at the table, wearing matching sweatshirts, their hair wet from showers, their smiles too clean. "Morning," Kelsey chirped like nothing was wrong. My wife didn't look up. She stirred her coffee with one hand and scrolled on her phone with the other. I waited for someone to say something that acknowledged the shift that had happened. Anything. But it was like last night hadn't existed. "We were thinking of doing that ridge trail before lunch," she finally said without lifting her eyes from the screen. Not, do you want to come? Just a statement. Another plan made without me. So I nodded and went outside. Sat on the steps of the porch and listened to the wind move through the trees like it was trying to warn me. I didn't follow them when they left. I stayed behind and waited for the cabin to feel like mine again. But it never did. They were gone for 4 hours. When they came back, something had changed again. I heard them before I saw them. Voices raised, too loud, not angry but frantic. I stood by the window and watched them approach. My wife's hair was a mess. Kelsey had a scrape on her leg and was laughing like she had just survived something dangerous and exciting. She came in first, slapped a pine cone down on the table like it was a trophy. You should have come, she said to me. It was wild. My wife came in second, quieter, avoiding my eyes. I didn't say anything. I walked into the kitchen and poured a drink I didn't want. Just something to do with my hands. But while I was there, something caught my eye. A phone, hers, left on the counter, unlocked. She never left it unlocked. I didn't mean to look. I didn't plan to. But when you're standing next to a live wire humming in front of you, sometimes your fingers move before your brain does. It was a text. From Kelsey. The message was old, from a few weeks ago. But it was burned into the screen like a scar. You sure he won't find out? I don't want this to blow up everything. Her reply had been, he won't. He sees what he wants. And I give him just enough to keep seeing it. I don't remember putting the phone down. I don't remember walking into the main room. I only remember standing in front of them, the words sitting on my tongue like fire, and the way their faces changed. Not with guilt, but calculation. She didn't ask what I'd seen. She didn't panic. She just stood up, walked toward me slowly and said, I was going to tell you. You just made it harder than it had to be. Kelsey stood behind her, arms folded, like she'd been waiting for this scene to happen all along. You brought her here, I said. To our place. You brought her here to what? Rub it in my face? Make me feel crazy? She didn't flinch. No. I brought her here because I was done lying. You're not stupid, but you never do anything. You just stand there and wait for the truth to hit you in the face. And it had. Full force. Like a glass door I didn't know was there. I looked at her, at Kelsey, then back again. How long? She tilted her head. Does it matter? That was when I knew it wasn't just betrayal. It was something deeper. A game. One I never agreed to play, but had already lost. I didn't raise my voice. That's the part that surprised me. There was a storm in my chest. A blizzard of questions and rage swirling with nowhere to go. But I stayed still. Focused. It was their turn to squirm, but they didn't. Instead, she sat down again, crossed her legs, and looked at me like I was the one who owed her an explanation. You already knew something was off, she said flatly. I just gave you a chance to pretend a little longer. Kelsey leaned on the doorframe behind her, smirking like she was watching a play she'd already read the script for. I looked at both of them, still trying to understand the scope of what I'd stepped into. This wasn't a moment, it was a setup. Something rehearsed. This wasn't their first conversation about me. What exactly have I been pretending? I asked. That we still had a marriage? That you still respected me even a little? She blinked slowly, then reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a cigarette. She didn't light it, just rolled it between her fingers like a habit from a past life. I think we stopped being married a long time ago, she said. We just didn't stop signing checks and sharing space. And this, I motioned between her and Kelsey, has been going on how long? Kelsey stepped forward now, not ashamed, not even guarded. She took my wife's coffee and sipped it like it belonged to her. Does it really change anything if we say 6 months or a year? She said. You were never really in the room, Jake. You just hovered. That word punched harder than I expected. Hovered. It was stunning how neatly they'd rewritten everything. Turned my patience into absence, my faith into ignorance. It was like watching someone break into your house and claim your bed was never really yours. I guess this trip was just to finish the job, I said. Seal the deal. Rub my face in it. Kelsey rolled her eyes. Please, don't flatter yourself. You were never the audience for this. That's when it clicked. I wasn't even the target. I was the casualty. A loose thread they needed to snip. They had already moved on emotionally, physically, mentally. I was just catching up to the wreckage of something they'd burned months ago. My wife, no, the woman who used to be my wife, finally looked me in the eye again. Her expression was not cruel. Worse, it was bored. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "And I don't want to fight. This thing between us is done. Has been. But I didn't want it to end ugly. Ugly. I wanted to laugh. The nerve. As if inviting the person you're secretly seeing on your anniversary getaway with your husband wasn't already grotesque. As if lying for months and then blaming the person you betrayed for not seeing it wasn't already the textbook definition of ugly. But I didn't laugh. I walked past both of them and opened the front door. "You want it done? Fine," I said. "But it's going to end on my terms now." Her voice followed me out, quiet but sharp. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I didn't turn around. Harder? I wasn't even close to finished making it hard. I walked until the cabin was swallowed behind me. The trees took me in like old friends. I didn't have a plan, just motion. Forward. Away. I needed space. Oxygen. Something untainted by the stench of betrayal still thick in my throat. Every step cracked through frost and dead leaves, but I hardly noticed. My brain was replaying the conversation, not to understand it, but to feel it again. To hold the blade up and study the edge they'd used. "You were never really in the room." That line wouldn't stop circling. Because it wasn't just cruel, it was strategic. Something rehearsed. This wasn't two people caught in a moment of weakness. This was deliberate, coordinated. They'd had time to build a narrative, turn my silence into absence, my steadiness into vacancy. And now they wanted me out clean. No questions, no scenes. But I wasn't going to vanish. When I came back to the cabin, the front door was open like they were waiting for me to crawl back and play my part. They were sitting on the couch, too close, too composed, like they'd paused a conversation mid-sentence and planned to resume the second I left again. "I want the truth," I said. "No filters, no riddles, everything." My wife leaned back, arms folded. "Why? So you can say you were owed something?" "Yes," I said. "Exactly that." She exchanged a look with Kelsey, a silent agreement, and then she told me. It started last fall. She had reconnected with Kelsey during one of their girls' weekends, one of the many I used to encourage her to take, thinking I was being supportive. Somewhere between the wine tastings and spa appointments, they crossed a line. And once it happened, she said, they realized it wasn't a mistake. "It was the first time in years I felt like I wasn't just playing wife," she said. "I wasn't apologizing for who I was." "And who is that?" I asked. She shrugged. "Someone who doesn't want a life built on routines and quiet loyalty." She said it like loyalty was an outdated currency. "I didn't tell you because I knew what you'd do," she went on. "You try to fix it, make lists, have talks, take us to counseling. I didn't want repair. I wanted escape." Kelsey just sat there, watching, like she was observing a performance. No guilt, no empathy, just curiosity. "So why bring me here?" I asked. "Why not leave a note? Be honest." "Because," she said with sudden clarity, "you wouldn't have believed it unless you saw it." It hit me then this wasn't about closure. This trip was theater. A final act staged not to confess, but to prove something. That I was obsolete. That my absence wasn't just emotional, it was necessary. I looked around the room. The bags by the door. The untouched dinner leftovers. The ash in the fireplace. It all looked like the aftermath of a battle I hadn't even been invited to fight. "I'm not going to scream," I told them. "I'm not going to throw anything. But I promise you this ends on my terms. And you don't get to walk away from it clean." My wife raised an eyebrow. "And what does that mean?" I turned, walked toward the back room, and shut the door behind me. It meant the next move was mine. I didn't sleep that night. The bed creaked under every shift of my weight. But my thoughts made more noise than the wood ever could. I wasn't angry in the way people expect a betrayed man to be. I wasn't throwing things or screaming into a pillow. No, I was studying, calculating. My mind was peeling back every conversation from the past 6 months. Every odd glance, every deflection. Every time she turned away from me with a lie half swallowed behind a smile. The truth wasn't just what they told me. It was in everything they hadn't. And it was all becoming very, very clear. By morning, I had made a decision. And it wasn't divorce. Not yet. I wanted them to feel something first. Something that wasn't satisfaction. They came into the kitchen late, laughing softly like the night before had never happened. My wife barely looked at me. Kelsey gave me a nod as if to say, still here? I poured coffee for myself. Only for myself. The silence dragged between us like barbed wire until I spoke. You should both pack, I said calmly. We're leaving early. That got their attention. My wife's smile faltered. Why? Because this place doesn't belong to Betrayal, I said. And I don't want to keep it tied to either of you. You don't own the cabin, Kelsey muttered. No, I said. But I own what happens in it. She smirked again, but something in her eyes shifted. They didn't pack. Instead, they took a walk. An hour. Maybe 2. I didn't care. I used the time well. Opened her suitcase. Found her journal. Not the fake one she kept in the nightstand, but the real one. Tucked between clothes, buried in a sweater she hadn't worn. I knew it was the real one because it started with a list. Things I can't say out loud. She had written about me in terms I didn't recognize. Not cruel, worse. Clinical. She had dissected our marriage like it was a failed experiment. And she'd written about Kelsey in ways that turned my stomach. Not love. Possession. Strategy. It wasn't just about wanting something new. It was about proving she could dismantle what we built and replace it with something she owned entirely. And she had the audacity to call me absent. I closed the book, placed it carefully back, and waited. When they returned, they looked surprised to find me still there. Still composed. I've called a car, I said. It'll be here in an hour. You'll both take it. I'll stay. You're not my father, she said with a cold laugh. No, I said. But I'm the man who paid for this trip, and I'm done letting you use me as a stage for your performance. That was when she lost it. Not in anger yet, but in control. Her voice rose, sharp and theatrical. You can't just tell us to leave. You already left, I said. You just forgot to take your bags. Kelsey looked ready to interject, but I turned to her with something I hadn't said yet. And you, I added. You don't get to play the innocent bystander. You wrote to her that I'd never figure it out, that I wouldn't do anything even if I did. You underestimated me. Kelsey's face tightened. The smile dropped. That hit harder than anything else I'd said. Because I wasn't giving them drama. I was giving them silence that meant something. They didn't argue anymore. They didn't shout. They packed. In silence. And when the car came, I stood in the doorway, watching them walk down the steps without looking back. I didn't wave. I didn't speak. But I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. Once the car disappeared down the trail, the silence of the cabin shifted. It wasn't peaceful. It was surgical. Clean, like an operating room after the patient has flatlined. I stood in the doorway for a long while, not because I needed to think. Thinking was done. But because I wanted the silence to soak into the wood. I wanted this place to remember that it had once been violated, and that it had expelled its invaders. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text my friends. I didn't confide in family. This wasn't something I needed to broadcast for sympathy or outrage. This wasn't a breakdown. This was reconstruction. Quiet, deliberate, mine. I stayed another day. I burned the sheets they had slept on in the metal fire pit out back. Not for drama. For purification. I watched the flames eat the fabric. Watched the smoke take with it the ghosts of their laughter. I aired out the rooms. Opened every drawer. Stripped the place bare of their touch. I wasn't angry, I was precise. Before I left the cabin, I took one final walk through the rooms. My fingers trailing along the furniture, the windowsills, the warped wooden beams. Not as a goodbye, as a surveyor. I wasn't mourning a loss, I was measuring damage. When I got home, the real work began. She was already back at our apartment. Of course she was. She always landed on her feet, even if she leapt from chaos. She didn't greet me when I walked in. She was sitting at the kitchen table, phone in hand, pretending to scroll, waiting for me to start something. I didn't. I walked past her into our bedroom. No, my bedroom now, and pulled a duffel from the closet. Not to pack. To clear. I pulled out the things that were mine, the things I'd bought, built, chosen. The rest? I left. Not as a gift. As garbage. I wasn't going to carry anything that touched her anymore. You're not saying anything? She asked. I paused. You don't want to hear what I have to say. You want a reaction. I want honesty. I turned to her. You've had mine every day of our marriage. You mistook that for weakness. That's not my fault. That's your failure of imagination. That shut her up. But not for long. You don't get to walk away like some kind of victim. You're not innocent in this. Innocent? I repeated. No. I was loyal. That's not the same as innocent. And even if I had failed you, even if I had been the worst husband on earth, it still wouldn't justify the games you played. The lies you wrote. The way you used my trust as cover to sneak someone else into our life. She stood then. You think leaving makes you noble? No, I said. But staying silent made me complicit. And I'm done with that. I handed her a key. The spare one I had made for emergencies. You've got 3 days. After that, I'm changing the locks. And the account passwords. Everything else you can explain to your parents. Or Kelsey. Or whoever else thinks this version of you is worth keeping. She stared at the key like it was a curse. Like it was heavier than the lies she'd carried all year. Don't you want closure? She asked finally. Don't you want to know why? I know why, I said. Because somewhere along the way, you decided your boredom was more important than my dignity. And with that I walked out. Not forever. Just for the night. Long enough to give her the same silence she'd tried to drown me in. But I wasn't drowning anymore. I was learning to swim with a knife in my teeth. I didn't return to the apartment for 2 days. I booked a cheap room outside the city, one of those places with flickering hallway lights and floral curtains that never quite close. It was perfect. Empty. Quiet. The kind of space where no one asked questions and the walls didn't echo your thoughts back at you like a courtroom. I needed silence not to think, but to prepare. By the time I stepped back into our apartment, I already had everything in motion. She was gone. Good. But her scent wasn't. It lingered in the walls, on the towels, in the dent of the couch where she used to curl up and scroll through her phone, pretending to laugh at strangers while lying to the man across from her. I opened the windows and started tossing things out. Not breaking, tossing. Deliberate, clean, permanent. The key was gone from the counter. She had taken it, which meant she had accepted the terms. She didn't call, didn't text. She was waiting for me to chase, to beg, to break down and offer some kind of compromise. She didn't know I'd already moved past wanting anything from her. But it wasn't over. I had one last thing to do. I went to visit her brother. He and I were close. Closer than she ever liked. He'd always been suspicious of how little she shared, how her stories changed depending on who was in the room. He was one of the first people who warned me early in our relationship. She doesn't lie because she's evil. She lies because she's terrified of not controlling the story. I didn't tell him everything. I didn't need to. Just enough. Enough for the dots to connect. When I mentioned the trip, how she had invited Kelsey, how they'd shut me out, how they'd built a whole betrayal in plain sight, his jaw clenched. She used you, he said. She weaponized your silence. She counted on it, I replied. We sat for a while in his small, dim kitchen, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't carrying the entire weight of this disaster alone. Someone else saw it. Not as gossip, as evidence. Before I left, he gave me something I hadn't asked for. A piece of truth. Something from before. You know, he said. She told me years ago that you scared her. Not in a bad way. In the way you don't break. In the way you keep coming back even when she pushes every button. She said that. She said it like it annoyed her. Like she hated not being able to destroy you. That stuck with me. On the ride home, through the open windows and city lights, I replayed that sentence over and over. And I finally understood the final insult of her betrayal. It wasn't about love or lust. It was about control. She couldn't control how much I endured. So she found someone she could dominate. Someone who'd echo back her worst parts instead of challenge them. When I got home, I changed the locks. Canceled joint accounts, transferred titles. I made it so that, on paper, she never existed in my life. She would have to explain that to whoever came next. And I didn't need to say a word. The first time she tried to call me, I didn't answer. It rang twice and stopped. No voicemail. Just that haunting silence. Like even her lies couldn't find a shape anymore. I didn't block her. Not because I wanted to hear from her, but because I wanted her to feel what it was like to reach into nothing. That space she left in me, She could live in it now. Let it echo. A week passed. Then an email arrived. No subject line. Just a wall of text. A confession? No, nothing so noble. It was a scattered, rambling mix of revisionist history and deflection. She told me she didn't plan for this to happen, and that she wasn't trying to hurt me, that she just needed something different. And things got complicated. She said Kelsey wasn't to blame, not really. She said it was a moment that became many, and by then it was too late to undo. She used words like blurred lines and emotional distance, like she was describing a bad novel, not detonating a marriage. And at the end of it all, she asked the one question that finally made me laugh, loud and bitter and alone. Can we still talk, even if we can't go back? She wanted a bridge over the fire she set. I didn't reply. I didn't even save the email. I closed it and let it die on the screen like a bug under glass. The next message came from Kelsey. Shorter, colder, a warning disguised as arrogance. I hope you're not planning to turn people against her. It's not a good look. I sat with that for a long moment, not because I was surprised, but because it confirmed something I already knew. They weren't sorry. They were nervous. Not about what they'd done, but about what I might do with the truth. I didn't respond to her either. Instead, I did something better. I gathered everything: texts, screenshots, photos, timelines. Not to post online. Not for revenge porn or scandal. I wasn't interested in dragging this mess into public spectacle. But I did make sure it reached the people who mattered, our closest circle. Quietly, clearly, without commentary. Folder. Shared. Just the facts. No spin. No rage. Let the truth speak. Within hours, I started getting messages. Not from her. From our friends. People who had seen her as the bright light, the charming one, the fun one. And now, they were silent at first. Then the apologies came in. Not on her behalf, but for doubting the version of events I hadn't even told them yet. They said they were sorry for the way they'd believed her narratives. Sorry for not noticing how small she'd made me over time. Sorry for not seeing the signs. But I wasn't angry at them. They weren't the ones who stared me in the face for months and said they loved me while they built an escape route behind my back. She did that. And now, she was the one alone in a story no one wanted to read anymore. Days passed. Then a week. The flood slowed to a trickle. Her name stopped showing up in my inbox. The phone no longer buzzed with fragments of her world. It was like a spell had been broken, and suddenly, I could hear myself think again. And in that space, free from noise and manipulation, I felt something unexpected: relief. Not victory. This wasn't a game I wanted to win, but freedom. The air tasted different. My own apartment, now scrubbed clean of shared objects, old scents, and her shadow, felt unfamiliar in the best way. I was rebuilding, quietly, thoughtfully, the way she never could. One evening, I opened a drawer she'd always kept locked. A shallow thing, part of an old desk we'd inherited from her grandmother. She never let me see what was inside. Claimed it held personal keepsakes, nothing of interest to me. But it wasn't locked anymore. Inside were receipts, photos, ticket stubs, small things, proofs of a second life. A map of deception, laid out in paper form. She hadn't even thrown it away before leaving. Either out of carelessness or arrogance, I couldn't tell. What struck me wasn't the betrayal anymore. It was the effort. How much time she'd spent curating this secret life while pretending ours was still real. I didn't feel pain. Not anymore. I felt distance. There was one photo that stuck out. A snapshot of her and Kelsey in a hotel room mirror. Both of them smiling, arms tangled. My wife's face half turned toward the camera with a look I hadn't seen in years. Joy? Maybe. But it wasn't the kind I'd ever received. It was freedom. The kind that blooms when you stop pretending to care who you hurt. I put the photo back. Closed the drawer. That night, I finally slept with the windows open. The breeze cold and real. No weight on my chest. No eyes waiting to measure my silence. I started walking every morning. No destination. Just motion. And people, strangers, started noticing me again. Smiling. Nodding. As if I'd rejoined the living. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't bracing for the next lie. I was standing upright again. Then, a final letter arrived. Handwritten. She must have known email wouldn't get through anymore. It was 5 pages long. No apology. No ownership. Just a chronology. Her side of the story. As if documenting her steps made them noble. As if saying, I didn't know how else to feel alive, somehow turned betrayal into bravery. I read it once. Then I shredded it. I didn't need her closure. I had built my own. Because here's the truth. She didn't break me. She revealed me. Showed me exactly how much I was carrying. How much I gave without asking anything in return. And now that she's gone, I finally see myself clearly. Not as a victim, but as someone who survived being forgotten and didn't forget who he was. Spring came early that year. I noticed it one morning as I passed the park near my apartment. The trees were starting to bud. The frost was gone. Everything looked like it was waking up. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't rushing somewhere or bracing for anything. I stood still, let the light hit my face, and just existed. I wasn't thinking about her. Not about what she did. Not about Kelsey. Not even about revenge. I'd already lived through the worst part. Watching someone I loved turn into a stranger while still sleeping beside me. Nothing they could do now would touch me. Not really. Because I wasn't in their story anymore. And they weren't in mine. I didn't tell everyone what happened. The people who mattered knew. The rest didn't need to. I wasn't going to wear the betrayal like a badge or bleed on people just to make a point. That wasn't healing. That was theater, and she had already tried to stage the final act. I chose to exit the stage instead. She reached out one last time months later. Just a simple message. I heard you're doing well. I hope you are. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, because I was free. You don't throw ropes to the people who once tried to drown you. Even if they smile while they do it. The apartment looks different now. The walls repainted. The furniture rearranged. Nothing dramatic, just realignment. Little choices that said, this space belongs to me again. I kept the dog. He's happier now. I can see it in the way he doesn't flinch when the door opens, doesn't pace when voices rise. He senses peace. Dogs always do. And I don't hate her. That's the twist ending no one expects. I don't hate her because hate is a leash, and she doesn't deserve to be attached to me in any form. What she did was cruel, yes, but it also taught me something I might never have learned on my own. That love without respect is just decoration. That silence can be mistaken for weakness, but it can also be the quiet before a man decides who he really is. So here I am, months later, not rebuilt but uncovered. More myself than I've been in years. To anyone reading this, thinking they're at the start of a similar story, don't wait for someone to return what they stole. Don't beg for answers from someone who thrives on keeping you confused. You don't need their closure. You need your own. And sometimes that starts with watching the door close and not opening it again. Ever.